Hey everyone, Doug here with B&H. Today we're gonna have a field day with something truly special, the Sony Venice 2. We were lucky enough to get our hands on the camera for a few days, not only hearing from some professionals about their experience and knowledge of the camera, but even getting to use it ourselves to shoot a little demo. The Venice 2 is an evolution built on the success of Sony's original Venice Cinema camera, and it features a brand new 8.6K sensor, along with some reworkings on the body itself. Perhaps most interesting of all is that, unlike the original Venice, the Venice 2 can record XOCN and ProRes formats internally, no separate recorder required. I don't need to spell out how that's a huge benefit to countless productions. Now, like I said, we were fortunate enough to get our hands on the Venice 2, so we're gonna show you some of the things that this camera can do. The Venice was already a monster of a camera with a stunning 6K sensor, but the Venice 2 takes it even higher with a new 8.6K sensor. And while from the outside the Venice 2 may look largely similar to the original Venice, there are some physical changes to note, which we'll get into in a minute. To get into some of the technical details on what's changed on the inside though, I actually had the chance to speak with Simon Marsh from Sony. Today, as you can see, we're looking at the brand new Sony Venice 2, and this is of course the sequel to the legendary Sony Venice. This is an 8.6K cinema camera, and there's a lot to talk about, so where do we start?
Well, let's start with the sensor, Doug. Right off the bat, it is another full frame sensor, so it's 36mm by 24mm, but it's 8.6K by 5.7K resolution. That's in full frame mode. If you go to Super 35 mode, you actually go to 5.8K resolution. It's also dual base ISO, so it's 800 and now 3200 for the high base ISO.
And that's up from what originally?
Originally on the Venice it was 500 and 2500, so this one is now defaults at 800 for the standard base ISO. Another key feature that we've implemented in here is internal recording to the AXS media card. So there's no requirement for the R7 on the camera. We can actually insert AXS cards directly into the body. This has the benefit of making the body shorter physically than the Venice plus R7 by 44mm.
Central to the Venice 2 is an emphasis on maintaining consistency with the Venice 1's color science and latitude. This isn't just because the color was fantastic on the original, which it was, but also in order to keep workflows consistent for DPs and colorists. It also means that the original 6K sensor can actually be used in the Venice 2 body with a sensor swap. Now, in case you're wondering, no, the new 8K sensor cannot be used in the original Venice.
So my name is Tim Nagasawa. I've worked on lots of television like Ray Donovan and House of Lies, and I've worked on some big features like Avengers and Planet of the Apes.
So what has your experience been so far using the Venice 2? Were there any particular features that you really wanted to take advantage of?
Oh yeah, absolutely. The improved dual ISO is incredible. And also the 8-stop wheel is really great, the ND. I remember picking it up the first time, it just felt ergonomically correct and right. Made it easier for the ACs to work with and operators. So me and the rest of the B&H video team had the chance to work with the Venice 2, building out a simple cinema rig and using some gorgeous Zeiss Supreme Prime lenses on the full frame sensor. Users of the original Venice should feel very familiar with the Venice 2. So let's put the camera to the test. Rolling. We're looking at the wide shot right here. This is our first shot for the day. And as you can see, if you look out right in front of me, it's pretty bright. We have this huge shaft of light coming in, and you can see it on the monitor here. It's obviously very blown out right now. The sun's doing like most of the work. So what I want to do to not have to close the lens down so much is I'm going to engage some of the NDs that are built into the camera. So now right here, this is with a LUT applied, so this is eyeballing it. We're not really doing it scientifically for now, but you can see we can go all the way down to 2.4, and at this point, only the faintest traces of the brightest parts of that light are really coming through. So you can shoot in almost any condition here. I'm going to get it to the point where we have just a little bit of a hot edge on the shelf over there. So then we'll fill it in and we'll get the shot going just how we want it. The real goal here was to see what kind of images the new 8.6K sensor could render, and of course how it fares with a mostly natural lighting situation. We only used fill light sparingly here. Probably one of the key changes to the Venice 2 over the original is the repositioning of the main settings and menus over to the assistant side of things. So on the operator side, you only really have a brief, very small screen rundown of the basic settings of the camera, your exposure settings, ISO, ND, of course, white balance, and so on.
The space was beautiful, and to be honest, I wanted an excuse to use a wide 25mm lens in an indoor space. To say that it's impressive at full frame is putting it mildly.
We've got here our Zeiss Supreme Primes. This is a T1.5 cinema lens. Beautiful, absolutely beautiful. So PL mount, of course, we're gonna put this right on the camera.
We shot with the full readout 3x2 mode, as I'm a big fan of recomposing in post. There's a huge amount of latitude in the Venice 2, but we'll see just how much we can save from the highlights later on. Since we shot everything in XOCN though, we should have a good deal of flexibility here. We were lucky enough to get 2 of the new 1TB AXS S66 cards for the day, but still, we had to keep a limited number of shots in mind. At 8.6K, each card could only store about 34 minutes of footage, so this short film, you could say, was going to have to be really short. It can't be overstated how beautifully smooth the Zeiss Supremes were here. The fall off in the bokeh was simply breathtaking, like in this shallow focused insert shot here. Meanwhile, the sensor handles all of that detail perfectly. The sheer depth of some of these shots has an almost 3D quality to them, especially as you get more into the portraiture and close-up territory.
We're about to change lenses here, but while we're there, I just wanted to point out this is an 8K camera, and it builds off of the original Venice as a 6K camera. But the thing is, if you actually look here around the mount, there are screws in place to take off the entire sensor assembly and swap out from the 6K to the 8K or vice versa. That's only on this, of course. The original Venice cannot take the 8K sensor. So that's an option for those who need a more consistent workflow. Let's say you have multiple cameras on set, one is the original, one is the newer one. Maybe you want to have the lower resolution 6K sensor on it just because. Remember, the color science does match between the two, so for productions that are wondering about using both, you can technically cut between them and it should be seamless. So we're just setting up for the final shot. I'm gonna do one last lens swap back to the 50mm because we're getting our final shot for the day. Now, before I actually get into it and show you this, you'll notice that we're in the very back of the apartment, so there's no light really. I mean, there's some light spilling in here and we do have our own lights that I can use, but I'm gonna try to keep it minimal so that it doesn't look too lit. And to help us with that, there is dual ISO on here. Now the base ISO is 800, but there's also a second base ISO of 3200. Now that's actually up from the original Venice, which I believe was 2500 on the top end. So, plenty to work with here. If we go into the exposure index menus, here is your exposure index options. You have base ISOs listed over here, and this is really cool, the latitude and the highlights. Now, at the base ISOs, you have 6 stops. So as you go up, and remember, this is not changing the base, you gain 8 because it's moving the entire latitude range up into the highlights. So you gain 8 stops that way. However, your shadows, of course, lose it. So if we change the base to 4000, which is the second base ISO, you again have 6 stops base at 4000. Now you can go all the way up to 16,000 and gain 8 stops that way. You can, of course, also start at the base ISO 4000 and go down. And this would get you an extremely clean image. I mean, the images off of this sensor are already extremely clean, so you don't really need to do this, but you, of course, would lose stops here. Now, the advantage to that would be to gain a lot of latitude in the shadows, because if you're changing your entire dynamic range down that way, those extra stops that we saw are now shifted downwards. So for something like this, this could actually be really good for low light, where you have some lights, but they're very dimly lit. And this is a good approach with these low light advancements these days. So we're actually gonna be able to stick with the 800 base here, just because now that I've cleared the ND out and I've got some lighting here, we're good to go anyway. But it's important to know.
It's great when you get into a location with a variable light, and the camera sees more than your actual eye.
It's weird.
So you shoot the sky, you see amazing stars. You know, we shot a great firelit scene. 3200 came in handy for that, and just a sunrise scene that we really digging into the cliffs, the side of a cliff, and getting detail out of that, and getting detail of a human face.
So that kind of also speaks a little bit to the dynamic range too. Then you can really reach into the shadows with that.
Oh yeah, it rolls off beautifully. It's really nice. Same thing with the color. The color just rolls off beautifully on the skin tones.
Really nice. With everything in the can, it was time to take a look at the footage in post. I went into this shoot knowing that I was going to be capturing some seriously huge files. The immense data produced by the 8.6K sensor means there's also new AXS cards to keep up with the throughput. The AXS S66 cards will support 6.6 gigabits per second, it's in the name, that supports 8K recording up to 60 FPS. We use the top recording spec here, the 8.6K mode at 24 FPS and fully open at 3x2. Now, not surprisingly, you have a lot of frame size and frame rate flexibility with the Venice 2, but here are some of the key formats that you can shoot in. 8.6K 3x2 at 30 FPS, 8.6K 17 or 16x9 at 60 FPS, 5.8K 6x5, that's an anamorphic mode, at 48 FPS, and 5.8K 17 or 16x9 at 90 FPS. So now you can actually also record the same formats as the R7 as well?
All the same formats, plus the new 8.6K resolution.
And what does that consist of?
It's XOCN is the main ones, but you also have ProRes 4K available on the recorder as well now.
Wow, so a huge benefit for faster turnarounds.
Yeah, exactly, yes.
It's great to have, have the ability to shoot a frame like that and able to extract, exactly the frame we wanted.
These cover the big formats that reach above 4K and require XOCN capture. ProRes capture actually tops out at 4K, so it's worth understanding your storage budget and production needs if you really intend on shooting above 4K here. Remember, a 1 terabyte card only holds 34 minutes here, so you absolutely need to keep this in mind. But here's the part I've been waiting to get to since before we even shot the video. What can we do with these XOCN files, and just what is the new sensor capable of? I was beyond thrilled to get the chance to work with this camera. Cinema cameras in general are engineering marvels in my opinion, and the Venice 2 really puts that into perspective. While the showstopper here is the new 8K sensor, when it comes down to it as a professional tool, the attention to detail in moving the camera configuration to the assistant side, consistency in the color to the original Venice, and of course the integration of XOCN recording makes it an incredible camera for high-end cinema and narrative production. So that's it for our time with the Sony Venice 2. I'm Doug with B&H, and I'll see you next time.